Hey guys, welcome back to Builds by Maz. In today's video, I'll show you how to install LVP flooring in your basement or anywhere where you have a concrete subfloor. If you have a wooden subfloor, you can check out another video I have posted dedicated to that type of install. This is the Nikon base LVP from Flooret, which not only looks incredible, but it costs less than $3 per square foot. This video will walk you through the full installation process from start to finish, which can completely transform your basement or other area of your home. Let's get started. Start by clearing the area you'll be working on. If you have large or heavy stuff, you can just move it to one side of the room for now. If your subfloor is dirty like this, you need to make sure you give it a thorough cleaning. I usually sweep everything up to pick up all the large particles, and then go back and vacuum to collect all the dirt. Then, using a long straight edge, check to make sure the whole subfloor is completely level. Any low or high spots will need to be leveled out. I've had to do this before in a previous project. You're basically using a patch and level kit, making sure that all the low spots are filled in, and continuously checking that it's all level. If you want a more detailed explanation, you can check out the video in the top right corner. So our concrete is now clean and level, but you never want to put LVP directly onto a concrete subfloor, because moisture can come in through the concrete and get trapped underneath the flooring, causing all kinds of problems. To mitigate that, we're first going to install some underlayment, which is basically a protective layer between the subfloor and the LVP. I'm using this underlayment by AirGuard. It's not too expensive but has lots of benefits, the most important being moisture protection. You absolutely have to have this with a concrete subfloor. But some other benefits are sound reduction, it adds a little bit of cushioning, some mold protection, and a tiny bit of insulation. This is pretty easy to install. Starting in the top left corner of your room, just roll out the underlayment until you get to the other side of your room. Check where the end meets the wall, and then using a razor blade or some scissors, you can just cut the roll to size. Lastly, just make sure it's flush against the edge of your wall. I recommend just rolling out one section at a time instead of doing the whole room at once. This will help prevent it from getting torn or damaged as you're installing your flooring. Which brings us to the main event, your actual LVP installation. If you're looking at LVP options, I really recommend Flooret, and some of the main reasons are listed right on the box. First, it has a 20mm wear layer, which is probably the most important thing that I'll go over. It also installs really easily, and the planks attach together without any glue. Each piece also has its own unique texture, as well as a pre-attached underlayment. And lastly, you have minimal repeat patterns. I'll go over what all that means in more detail, but if you do decide you want to try out Flooret, you can get 50% off your sample order by clicking the link in the description below and using code MAXFLOORET. This is a great way to test out different colors and options for just a few dollars. So what you're seeing here is the Nikon base LVP. The first thing I want to go over is a wear layer. So this is an invisible layer on the surface which protects the flooring. As I mentioned, this is 20 mils, which is equal to half a millimeter. That's about 2.5 times the industry average. I cut into this scrap piece I had to try and show you guys what it actually looks like. You can see I'm pulling up little pieces of this surface layer. The thicker the wear layer, the better, and Flooret has options all the way up to 40 mils. You'll also see on the back of each plank is a pre-attached rubber underlayment. This has a lot of the same benefits as a standalone underlayment, but with the concrete subfloor, I still recommend using a separate one to add some extra moisture protection. The next cool thing is that all these patterns aren't just printed on. You can actually feel the texture. For example, this knot here, I can run my fingernail in between the grooves, so it feels like real wood. Before you start laying the LVP, you should open up at least 3 boxes worth so you have the widest variety of patterns possible. You can see here how many options I have to choose from, which will help me to really randomize my floor pattern. Next, you'll need to measure the full width of the room perpendicular to the direction that the planks will be laying. You'll then want to divide that total number by the width of one individual plank, which in my case is 5.9 inches. My room was 221 3/4 of an inch wide. We subtract half an inch to account for the 1/4 inch spacer going on either end, giving us 221.25 inches. We divide that by 5.9 inches, which is the width of each plank, giving us 37.5 planks to cover the width of the room. When you do this calculation, you're looking at the last decimal. 0.5 means my last row is going to be half as wide as a normal row. If the decimal is less than 0.5, like 0.2 or something, the last row is going to be too small and you'll need to make adjustments to your starting row. For example, you might trim off 1/3 of your first row so that the last row can be 1/3 thicker, making each row look a little more uniform in size. I also recommend getting a flooring installation kit, which will contain some of the main tools you need for this project, including a mallet, a tapping block, a pull bar, and a bunch of spacers. And this is everything else you'll need to install Flooret's LVP. You've got the installation kit, which I just talked about, and it does include more spacers than this. You're going to want a good speed square, a sharp razor blade, as well as some blade backups because you'll need to be replacing them, a tape measure, and lastly a pencil. So it's really not too much stuff. The spacers are double-sided, but for this LVP, make sure you use the 1/4 inch side. These boards connect with a tongue and groove system. You've got a groove along the top and this tongue along the bottom. Make sure you have the tongue facing down towards your room as you start your install. Beginning in the top left corner, place your board down using one spacer on the short edge and two spacers along the long edge. These 1/4 inch spacers will leave a gap around the flooring, allowing it to expand and contract with changes in temperature and seasons. With this first row, connect each piece along the short edge by placing the next board at an angle until it fits into the groove and laying it flat. Be sure to align each edge as exactly as possible so that you have a uniform straight line to continue the next row on. Once you get to the end of the room, you likely won't be able to fit a full piece, so we'll need to trim off the end of the plank. But you can't just cut it off right here. The reason is because we're going to need this grooved edge of this plank to fit into the corresponding spot on the previous row. So what you'll do is flip the board upside down so that the tongue is facing the opposite direction away from you. Line it up against the wall, making sure you use your 1/4 inch spacer on the short edge. Align your speed square with the end of the previous row's plank, not including the gray tongue. Using a sharp razor blade, you can then score the LVP 3 or 4 times using firm pressure. Make sure you hold your speed square tightly in place so that it doesn't slip. Then you can easily snap your board along the scored edge, creating a crisp, straight line. Flip this cut end back over and it should fit perfectly into the prior row, leaving just enough room for a spacer on the end. We'll then take the remainder of that cut piece and use it to start the beginning of the second row. To connect this piece, install it at an angle until it fits into the groove of the previous row and then lay it flat. We can then use the tapping block to ensure a tight fit. For LVP, make sure you use the side that has a double corner design. That way the force is applied to the top of the board and it doesn't damage the lower tongue. Starting on the short edge, give the board a few light taps to ensure it's snug against the spacer along the wall. Then do the same thing all along the long edge. This will ensure you have a tight connection to the previous row. While starting each row, you also want to make sure you pay attention to where each board ends. You want to maintain at least 8 inches of separation between seams of adjacent rows. With the next board in this row, we'll first install the long edge, again hammering it so it's firmly in place. You'll then be left with this little gap between planks. We'll need to bridge this gap using a short spare piece of LVP, and sample pieces are actually perfect for this task. The bridge will ensure that the planks remain on the same plane, so when you hammer the short edge, they'll connect together evenly. Remove the bridge, and you'll see that the short edges are connected tightly with no gap between them. This is how most boards will be installed, by first attaching the long edge, putting the bridge into place, and then hammering in the short edge. You can just repeat that process all along the remainder of the row until you get to the end piece. With the final piece of the row, remember to flip over the board, push it against the wall with the spacer in place, line up your speed square, and give it 3 or 4 solid cuts with your razor blade before snapping the piece to size. Go ahead and attach the long edge into place. You'll have your small gap between the short edges, but you'll notice you can't tap it from the right with your tapping block because the wall's in the way. This is where your pull bar comes into play. You can slide the wider edge along the edge of your plank and use the other side to hammer it into place. You'll need this tool anytime you're installing LVP right up against a wall. Here was my remaining plank after cutting the last row to size. If I install it here at the beginning of the third row, you'll notice that I'm starting to develop a stair-step pattern. To break that up and randomize things a bit, I'm going to cut off a portion of the first plank. This way I've got a little more variation in the distances between my seams. Another thing to pay attention to when starting rows is that you're not ending seams in the same spot too often, like these two rows here. Instead, I shortened this plank so it ended between these two seams here. Remember, always shorten the side against the wall so that your tongue and groove system remains intact for connecting the next board. As you're working, also make sure you're not putting matching boards too close to each other so your floor looks truly random. As you start getting close to the edge of the underlayment, you'll notice that there's this thin blue line here. You normally want to stop before that because we'll need to reach underneath and pull out the attached adhesive for connecting to the next section. Once you reach that line, go ahead and roll out another strip of the underlayment. Unfold the pre-attached adhesive and then you can remove the protective covering, exposing the sticky edge. Then overlap it onto the adjoining strip and press down firmly to attach these two pieces together. Go ahead and do that along the entire length of the room, and it should look something like this. You can also trim down the underlayment as needed using scissors or your razor blade. For small or unusual sections like this, you won't be able to attach it using the regular pre-attached adhesive. Instead, cut it to size and you can use some underlayment seam tape, which is designed exactly for this purpose. Just apply it all along the edge of your cutout strip and it'll stay in place. With the next portion of underlayment down, you can continue laying the LVP just like normal. If your room isn't perfectly rectangular, you may have some sections where you need to cut your LVP to fit the shape of your walls. In this situation, I lined up my LVP board and marked off the edges that would need to be cut out. If you need to cut out a U-shaped piece like this, the best tool is going to be a jigsaw. I drilled a hole in both corners, large enough so that I can fit my jigsaw blade into it. You want to cut along the skinniest edge first, because it's the most fragile. Then you can cut both edges, giving you a nice U-shaped cutout. If possible, you really want to avoid cutting pieces so close to the edge, because it's much more susceptible to damage. I had to be really careful when tapping this into place, and here I utilized my pull bar to avoid putting stress on the middle of this board. I'll also note that you can easily erase any pencil marks with a regular eraser, so feel free to mark up any of your measurements right on the surface. Outside of when you have to make weird cuts like that, installing LVP is a really fast and simple process, and you can make a lot of progress really quickly. Here was how our basement looked with the flooring about halfway done, and already it made such a difference. I shifted my power rack back across the room and decided this would be a good time to test the durability of Flooret's LVP since I'm putting a home gym on top of it. Using a scrap piece of flooring, I wanted to test how it would hold up to weights being dropped on it. I was planning to buy some rubber gym flooring to go on top of this, but I didn't know how thick to get it, and it depended on how breakable this LVP was. Even after a few drops with a 45-pound plate, there was no damage to the surface, no scratches or dents, nothing besides a few dirt marks on the backside. I was really impressed with that, and it made me confident that just a thin layer of rubber would be plenty sufficient for my home gym. If you have support pillars like this in your basement, you can easily cut around them the same way I showed you earlier using your jigsaw. Just mark off the edges that need to be cut, remove the unneeded section, and install carefully, using light taps with your mallet. Another challenge you might face is installing your LVP along angled walls. Measure and mark where the angle begins on your piece of LVP, and then use an angle finder like this to transfer the angle. You don't even have to turn it on. You can just line it up on your mark on the LVP and use it as a guide when cutting out the angle. With the angled edge cut out, you can install the board as normal. If the angle finder doesn't reach all the way across the width of the board, then make a mark as far as you can and use a longer straight edge to make your cut. These longer angle pieces can be harder to snap, so you may need to press it into the ground. On that note, it's important to always change out your razor blades when you feel them getting dull and the LVP isn't breaking apart as easily. When you get to the final row, you most likely won't be able to fit a full-size plank. Measure the width, taking into account the spacer, and cut it down to size. You can then use your pull bar to pull this last row into place. Lastly, I'll go over how to install transition pieces. This is called T-molding, and it's good when you're moving to something like carpet. Measure the width of your door frame or other space where you'll be installing the transition piece, and then cut it to size. Dry fit it in your area to make sure it fits correctly, and then we'll be gluing this bottom piece to the subfloor. Thoroughly clean the installation area, and then using some low grit sandpaper like 80 grit, we're going to rough up the bottom of the T-molding. This will help it attach better when we glue it to the subfloor. I recommend using this Loctite PL Premium construction adhesive. It's got great holding power, so you don't have to worry about your T-molding coming loose. Give it a good bead, and then press it firmly onto the concrete subfloor. Make sure to weigh it down so the glue has good contact with the floor for about 24 hours until it fully cures. Install the remainder of your flooring, still maintaining a 1/4 inch gap between the LVP and the transition piece. To install the actual T-molding, line up the grooves with the channel that we glued onto the floor and press down firmly, and you should hear it click into place. The last step is to give your flooring a full cleaning because there's probably going to be a lot of dust from working on the concrete. But once that's done, you can enjoy your new flooring. Adding Flooret LVP is a great way to truly transform any unfinished space, and you can see how much of a difference it made to my basement and home gym area. Adding this LVP really is one of the most DIY friendly home renovations, and it can add a ton of value to your home. If you like the flooring shown in the video and want to see it for yourself, don't forget to use code MAXFLORET for 50% off your sample order. If you also want to learn how to install your own baseboards like this, you can find the video in the top right corner here or search for it on my channel. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe to see more home renovation videos, and we'll see you next time.